Dear Father, this is our prayer. Lord, Lord, give us much more desire for you. Help us to discern. So what is truth and what is false? What is fake? Let your words of God be spoken to us. Let us really love you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So today we will read chapter 23 of Book of Attire. So first of all, we will start with some PowerPoints. So today we will focus on Tyre, the nation of Tyre. So it's talking about Jesus stretching his hands upon the nations of the coastal nations. Actually, you can say that in the ancient world, Tyre was one of the focus area, one of the important cities. So in chapter 13, we talked about Babylon. And Babylon was the greatest power in the eastern parts. But today, our focus will start with Tarshish. So you can say that it's from east to the west. Because why? Because Tyre was also shaken by this kind of trembling. So you can say that it's a kind of a tsunami trembling to Tyre. How did God tremble the seas? So when God really trembled the seas, it really trembled Egypt, Tyre, and a lot of Mediterranean nations as well. So all the Mediterranean countries would be trembled by the suffering of Tyre. So in verse 1 and verse 14 is talking about the wailing of the Tarshish fleece. And in verse 1, we are also told there's the bad news from Tyre. Because according to the will of God, Tyre will become a desolation. And also Sidon, that is the northern, the city in the northern part, will also become very quiet and silent. Actually, the Mediterranean Sea was the sea with a lot of merchants and traders and business and commerce. But finally, there was no more productions, no more trades. So that's why when Egypt heard of this news, he wailed as well. Because why? A lot of crops produced from Egypt would not be exported, would not be transported to the rest of the world when Tyre was in ruin. And also to the land of Canaan, their protection, their fortress was destroyed as well. But God promised that after 70 years of time, Tyre would be restored. So if you were Jehovah, if you were the Lord, and you need to shake the nations, where would you like to stir up the tsunami? And God chose Tyre. So shall we take a look at the next one? Actually, Tyre and Sidon belongs to the city of Phoenicia. Actually, they were the Greece fleeting nations. Okay, actually, they settled down in Phoenicia. And even some people say that the Phoenicians also came from Phoenicians. And when Joseph was the prime minister of Egypt, actually, at that time, Egypt was a kind of seaman or seafarers nation at that time. So probably because a lot of people came from Kittim, not Kittim, Kittim. So you can look at this map. This is the whole world of Asia. So Mediterranean Sea was the area that they did the business. So you can see the red routes, and all these red routes represented the navigation routes. And you can take a look at the next one. Oh, yes, this one. So all the coastal nations were their cities, and including the green areas in the eastern parts of the Mediterranean Sea. Actually, all these red lines represent the colonies of nations. They are also the areas for the people to emigrate to do the business. Actually, Tyre and Sidon were two separate cities. So at the beginning, Sidon was the first one to start. Actually, Sidon was even more important than Tyre. But later on, when Tyre, the business in Tyre was getting much better. So that's why Tyre was superior to Sidon. Actually, Tyre was a sea island. So here we are told that is the marketplace of all nations in verse 3. It's an island. It's talking about Tyre. So you can see around the islands, there were a lot of mooring places for the ships. And you can also find that there were the very strong walls surrounding the whole island. So in the middle of the place, it was the temple. And you can find the harbor here. It was called the Harbor of Sidon. So very likely, Tyre was a commercial center developed by the people of Sidon. It's a commercial center. In the next one. So Tyre was a sea island. But the ancient Tyre city was there. But God prophesied that God will reverse Tyre, turn over Tyre, be it in the time of Assyrian Empire or the time of Babylon, or maybe the time of Alexandria under the Greek Empire. So Tyre was actually attacked by all these empires before. But because Tyre was an island, so that's why all the armies could not really go onto this island very easily. But until King Alexander, under the rule of the Greeks, So Alexander ruined Tyre city and turned all the rubbles into an embankment across the sea. So they used the embankment to go into Tyre to attack Tyre. So that's why finally the walled city was defeated, and all the armies could go onto the island, and this was happening to Tyre. So it tells us that according to the history, Tyre had been attacked by many different nations. But because there was an embankment, right? So that's why on the both sides of the embankment, there were a lot of sands. So finally, this island gradually became a peninsula. So, and finally, and this city was connected with the ancient Tyre city, because it was conquered by Babylon before. But here in this context, we are told that this city was attacked by Assyria. Actually, Phoenicians, the language of Phoenician is very special. It's the language of Shem. So be it the Hebrew or the Greeks, actually both these two languages are from the grammar of Phoenician's language. That is from the original language of Aram. So how come the Phoenicians invented the letters and characters? That is simply because of the business. They need to do a lot of business. They need to communicate in terms of the business. So they need to understand more in terms of the numbers, in terms of the currency, in terms of the location. So that is for the benefits of the commerce. Or maybe the Aleph in Hebrew. Actually, that is to start with the cows. So can you see the head of the cow? And that is the other way around of the cow heads. So actually, the language of Hebrew is developed along this line. Be it the Greeks or maybe the Aram, or the Latin, all of them are developed from Phoenicians. So you can tell that Phoenicians, you can see that Phoenician was very important to the Mediterranean nations. It was very important to the Hebrew culture, to the Mediterranean culture. Shall we take a look at the scriptures today? So that is about the oracles of Tyre. So God sent his hands to tremble all nations. So by the coast, by the seas. By the seas here refers to Tyre. So actually, this is the chapter 23 is the last passage about the judgments on all nations. From chapter 13, the oracle about Babylon, to chapter 23, the prophecy about Tyre. Within, we've been talking about 10 nations, and Tyre was the last nation. And this is a kind of a tsunami trembling upon the city. So this tsunami trembling, really affects all the Mediterranean nations. So actually, all the bad news were heard from the piers, from the harbors, from the seafarers, from the seamen. So that's why a lot of people learned of the suffering of the Tyre, that the Tyre has become the desolation and no more houses and no more harbor. In verse 1. Even your ships went into Tyre. You found no more pier, no more harbor for you to moor. And also we talk about Sidon. Actually, Sidon was a city which was very prosperous because of the coastal business. But now it became very silent, became very quiet. It is because of the suffering of Tyre. And also in the southern parts, that is along the river Nile, that is the Shihor. Shihor also referred to Nile. So actually there are no more crops either. Because why? Because Tyre was the biggest harbor, biggest pier of all nations. Actually, Tyre actually was a big harbor to Sidon. And later on, Tyre, the business of Tyre was getting bigger and bigger. But here we are told that the Sidon in verse 4 need to be ashamed. Because why? Because why? In verse 4, the nations, the coastal nations have spoken. I have neither been in labor nor given birth. I have neither reared sons nor brought up daughters. Verse 4. So here, the city by the Great Sea refers, the fortress of the sea refers to Tyre. The fortress of the sea refers to Tyre. Here we are told that there's no more production, that it became very unproductive. And all the commerce and business stopped. So all those countries that were supposedly to pay the tribute to Tyre could not enter Tyre anymore. So in other words, the business was stopped. No more business could be made. So that's why all the people who heard of this news would wail, would be in suffering, would be in pains. So that's why in verse 6, that's why here, wail, you people of the island, because in this is this your city of revelry, the old city, whose feet have taken her to settle in far off lands. Verse 7. Actually, the Phoenicians have built lots of commercial centers in the southern parts of the area. And the farthest area even went to Tarshish. But now Tyre was in ruins. So that's why all the people of Tyre have been scattered to the different places. So that's verse 1 to verse 7 belongs to the first session. So all the neighboring countries, all the neighboring cities were wailing for Tyre, because Tyre was the focal point of the Mediterranean nations. So everything stopped now. No more business, and everyone was suffering. And then in the second paragraph is verse 8 to verse 14. Here we are told what's happened. So here we are told that God stretched out his hand upon the glory of man. The verse 8 actually is a question. And God said, actually, originally, Tyre was supposedly to give people the crowns. So in other words, when you did the business with Tyre, then you will receive the glory. So when you are rich, then you will put the crowns. If you could do the business with Tyre, then you will become the royalty. But the problem was that, so who planned all this against Tyre? Who would make all these things happen to Tyre? So actually, you know that this is a prophecy. Actually, before the things happened, it was spoken. So it was very contrary to the very rational commentators or the Bible scholars. Because they always thought that the prophecy was spoken after the things had happened. So because a lot of Bible scholars always thought that the prophecies was only spoken after the things had happened. So they only took all these prophecy as a kind of historical record. But we know that this is a problem. But so just like verse 8, before the things happen, and the writer Isaiah had raised the questions already. He was asking, who planted this against Tyre? So that's why we can tell that obviously it is a prophecy to foretell something. So who is the one to arrange, to allow all these sufferings to the Tyre? So all these are my thinking. So the Bible didn't mention all these things clearly. But here in the Bible, in the context, Isaiah was raising these questions. Isaiah was not asking the questions, was not asking the people of Tyre the questions. Actually, whenever Isaiah was prophesying, he was prophesying to the people in Judah, to the people in Jerusalem. So, for example, when Pastor Deborah was prophesying, she was prophesying to us, to the people of 611 Church, right? So here, the question was raised to the people in Tyre as well. So here in verse 9, we are told the answer. Who was the one to plan all these things? It was the Lord Almighty who planted with the purpose to bring low the pride of all glory and to humble all who are renowned on the earth. And that was the will of God. Of course, Tyre was very proud of the success and the achievement of their business. They put all the glory to themselves. But do you think that God was very jealous of the people's success and achievements and the riches and wealth? Do you think so? Do you think that God was not happy when the people got the financial achievements? No, definitely not. Actually, God would like to bless Abraham. And God would like to bless Abraham's descendants as well. But this is not only the spiritual blessings, but also the physical and material blessings as well. So all nations will call Abraham's descendants as the blessed nation. And God was not singling out this area, these points. What God cared about was that when people got very wealthy, they put all the glory upon themselves. They become the nitrogen balloons. They were self-expanding. They became very proud. They become very proud of themselves. And it becomes the norm for them to be proud. Because for the very rich people, that they would like to boast of themselves, boast of their wealth. They would like to show off. They would like to show off their wealth. So this is the problem of the rich. So of course, if you are very rich, you will buy a supercar, you will buy a race car. When you are rich, of course, you will build a very big house to make people very jealous of you. Of course, you would like to show off your riches so that people can see. Show off. So that to show off all your wealth. But God was not happy about it, and God would strike against it. Oh, that is the sense of the achievement that God would like to strike against, because they thought that it is all because of their own strength, because of all their efforts, because of all their plannings and strategies. So they would like people to call them God. For example, to call them the God of wealth, the God of property, something like that. So that's why people will end up worshiping all these kind of deities and gods. And that's what's happening in the Asian world. So that's why God would like to cut away all these haughty eyes, to cut away all this pride. Of course, God would like to bless us with prosperity. Of course, God would like to bless us with health. that is God's blessings upon us. But for us, we need to stay somber. We need to stay awake. We need to understand that all these blessings are from God, and God is the source of all our blessings. So that's why we need to give thanks to God when we can be rich, because all the glory, all the power, all the wealth are from God. But when the world is like that, and then when the world is prideful, then God will turn around the situation. So this is like the Beatitudes. So that is the reversal of the sense of value. Because why? There's no God in this world. But God would like to come in to let the whole world see that God is here. And God would like to reverse the whole situation. And God would like to reverse the whole situation. So that's why finally at the end of chapter 23, and God will restore Tyre once again. The business, the achievements of Tyre, the wealth, the interest of Tyre in verse 28 would be set apart for the Lord finally. Because God was the God of the whole nations. But God was the God who will bless all nations. God is the one to bless all the business, bless all the merchants, all the traders. Because all the wealth comes from the Lord. Because all the wealth should be set apart for the Lord. So that's why God would like to reverse the whole world, to turn around the false sense of value. So here it is talking about that. So in verse 10, it tells us that the people in Tarshish would not be under any more restraints of Tyre anymore. Because when it comes to the business, there were quite a lot of treaties, there were a lot of restraints actually. So we can call all these treaties as a kind of economic encroachment. So this is exactly like what's happening, what the U.S. has been doing to the southern parts of America. So it's a kind of, so in other words, it was taking advantage of the manpower in the poorer countries and trying to get the maximum benefits, economic benefits from those areas. So it turns to South America. Be the dependent countries upon U.S. When Tyre was turned over, was defeated, then the people in Tarshish were no longer under its restraint anymore. So it's talking about the very eastern parts to the very western parts. So in a sense, it's telling us that the whole Mediterranean Sea was set free from the restraints of Tyre. And then in verse 11, the Lord has stretched out his hands over the sea and made its kingdoms tremble. And God would like to take away all the fortresses and the strongholds of the Canaan. So the people in Sidon would not find the city a joyful city anymore. And they could not settle there anymore. Because why? Because the trembling was so deep, was so big. So when you have listened to all this, but you still do not believe that God would not do all these things, would not be able to do all these things, then God, and then Isaiah talked about the Chaldeans in verse 13. So here is talking about the coastal area and also the coastal deserted area. Actually, the coastal deserted areas were the areas belonging to Chaldeans in verse 13. The Chaldeans also refer to Babylonians. So once again, all these places will become the desolations. And the Assyrians arrived at Tyre, and took away all their temples and turned Tyre into the desolated areas like Babylonian. So it happens between 703 to 702 years. Actually, in the year of 703, it was the time that that was the battle between Assyrian and Babylonian. After Assyrian defeated Babylon, then they went forward to defeat the fortress of Tyre. And then finally they went further into the southern parts, into the Sidon. So when you look around Babylon, when the things happened, all the fleets of the Tarshish would wail. And even the fleets in the farthest area, they could not return to the harbor because the harbor was gone, the pier was gone. Because why? The fortress was gone, the city was gone. How come all these things will happen? Because why? Because that was God who stretched out his hands upon against Tyre. And finally, that the last session, verse 15 to verse 18. And God promised that at the end of the 70 years, and the Lord would visit Tyre again, so that their economy, their finance, their business would be restored with all the nations. And then it would become a new Tyre, which was very different from the old ones. Because why? Because all the profits and all the earnings would be set apart for the Lord. It's just like when King Solomon was building the temple of God. Actually, the king of Tyre, King Hiram, also sends all the Lebanon trees, all the timbers, all the resources to Solomon, for Solomon to build the temple of God on the hill. In the end times, so at the very end, Tyre's prophets will go to those who live before the Lord for abundant food and fine clothes. That is in the last verse. So all the Lebanon's timbers will go before the Lord, will be used to build the temple of God. All the profits from the business will be set apart for the Lord, will be sent to the Lord, so that all the people serving right before the Lord will be fed and will also have fine clothes. So this is a promise for Tyre. It's also the promise for Jerusalem. And God will turn around the situation, so that all nations would return to the Lord. So now we take the following time to ponder about what we have been learning. So when we talk about the scriptures of Babylon, it's talking about King Hezekiah. So he's got the false expectation. Unrealistic expectations, because they thought that Babylon would stay alliance with the other countries to defeat Assyria. But today, in the passage today, King Hezekiah would like Tyre to become the fortress to the land of Canaan. But once again, God's took away all these unrealistic expectations and desires of King Hezekiah, because all these were unrealistic. So that's why God would like to break all the expectations of King Hezekiah. Actually, in the same way, we have a lot of unrealistic expectations on God. We could not tell what is our own personal desire or dreams, or is the right expectations. There's a Bible scholar. He wrote a book that is From Illusion to Prayer. The book's name is called From Illusion to Prayer. We have to tell what is only our illusion, what is our unrealistic expectation, and what is our realistic prayer. For example, let's say there's a teenage girl, a small girl. When she was very small, she would like to have a doll. But when she got the doll, she thought that she was very blessed. So maybe you and I also got to share the same illusion, share the same dreams. But I want to ask you, were you really blessed when you really got hold of this doll? So when God really listened to our prayer and blessed you with a doll, were you really so blessed? But at the same time, throughout the time, have we ever forgotten all these blessings from the Lord? Does it mean that when we get the doors, we got the blessings from the Lord? Does it mean that? So in the same way, when Tyre was a very rich country, so the wealth of Tyre, was its equal to the blessings of God? No, not necessarily. So finally, actually, God cut away all these blessings, cut away all these finance from Tyre. So now we have to tell what is illusion and what is the truth. So the truth is to return to the Lord. We need to return. We need to return our lives to the Lord. We need to go back to the Lord, because whatever that we had before will be gone one day. Because all those things were not our ultimate blessings. We need to understand that what do we get in the Lord? That is God's righteousness and God's kingdom. And that when God got the contentment from us, then we will be satisfied as well. May God bless His words.